Joining me now is author and journalist John Nichols. He is of thenation.com and author of the book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, and a friend of the show. John, thank you so much for coming back and sharing this time with us.
I'm honored to be with you, my friend. And I do like being identified as a friend of this show. I think it's a great one.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I've followed your work for years because you cut to the core of the intersection of race, class, white supremacy, capitalism, the Democratic Party. But your most recent article dealing with Ron Johnson, and not only from the perspective of the bidding of the ultra rich, which is a part of the title, but tell us what you have found in the conjunction, in the intersection rather, of Ron Johnson, the Republican Party, and the moment that we find ourselves in American history.
Absolutely. Ron Johnson is probably the most vulnerable Republican U.S. senator in 2022. He hasn't announced whether he'll run for re-election, but it's expected that he will. Donald Trump is actively encouraging him to run. And the thing to understand about Ron Johnson is that until Trump came along, he was a backbencher. He was somebody people didn't pay attention to. When Trump came on the scene, Johnson kind of flowered. He was excited. He was thrilled. He loves this world of conspiracy theories and kind of really ugly, crude politics. That's where Johnson's at. And so a lot of people think of him as just a, kind of an unblinking, unthinking Trumper. But there's a deeper, darker side to the guy. And that is he's a very rich man who got himself elected to the U.S. Senate by spending a lot of money, much of it his own money initially. And since he has been there, he has used his position to dramatically enrich his campaign donors. And a new study by ProPublica reveals that two major donors to the Johnson's campaign and to his political projects, to PACs that have supported him in key elections, gave in the last election cycle about $20 million to help Johnson get elected.
Wow.
I know, it's a huge amount.
Wow.
But here's a bigger number for you, my friend. Johnson then went to the mat in the 2017 tax cut fight, the Trump tax cut, to include a small provision that even Trump didn't want to do, right? And because it was so closely divided, Johnson said, well, I'm not going to vote for this unless I get this. It became such a big deal that they included the provision he had asked for. It is now revealed through confidential documents that that provision could be worth, it already has been worth to these major donors to Johnson's campaign, over $200 million, and it could ultimately be worth, it is expected that it could be worth $500 million, $500 million.
Wow.
So a $20 million investment in Ron Johnson gets you $500 million.
And for the ruling elite, for the wealthy in this country, that's a good investment, right? And we've seen this model. This is nothing new, but I don't know that I've ever seen it to this extreme. And perhaps you could talk about that from the historical perspective, because he's overachieving in terms of the grift.
Yeah, the grift is the right word, my friend. And he is overachieving. Look, we need to understand, and this is when you were introducing, you're talking about these kind of critical junctures, these intersections that we have in our politics. There's a reason why this country operates the way it operates. For a very long time, really since the founding of the country, you have had wealthy people using the government of this country to benefit themselves. Not sometimes directly, i.e. members of Congress who are enriching themselves, but often enriching their class, their donors, their supporters, to make sure that they remain in a position of economic and social and political power. Right. So that's always been there. We shouldn't, be neglectful of that reality. But what we should understand is that in Ron Johnson and people like him, this operates on steroids. And we are now in a moment where the Democrats have narrow control of the Congress. And that we've seen some dialing back of some of the worst things that happened. But one of the things that really needs to be addressed, and Bernie Sanders and others have talked about this, is the 2017 tax cut, because that
Right.
legislation has within it not just lower taxes for billionaires. I mean, incredible giveaway of just an immense amount of money to the super rich. It also has these little footnotes, if you will, these little lines of language that you and I wouldn't even have paid much attention to,
Mm,
that are making the super rich dramatically richer.
mm.
They're not paying their taxes, and they're not paying their taxes because language was inserted, in this case at the behest of Ron Johnson, that allowed them to avoid, not, when we think of somebody not paying taxes, you think, oh, well, maybe, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000, maybe $1 million, but $500 million.
Wow. This is I remember the tax fight of 2017 well. I was neck deep in it along with everyone else,
Yeah.
trying to stop it from happening. But it was a moment that the Republican Party seized upon their majorities
Mhm.
with no regard for a supermajority, using every tool at their disposal to get their agenda accomplished. And you outlined the path for Ron Johnson getting his donors somewhere potentially to the tune of $500 million. Republicans know how to use power to get what they want.
Mhm.
What's the problem with the Democratic Party?
Oh, it's writ large. I mean, the problem with the Democratic Party is that when Republicans are in power, they seek to lock their power in.
Yeah.
They seek to suppress votes. They seek to restructure election systems. They seek to weaken unions.
Hmm.
They do all sorts of things. And they seek to dramatically enrich the people who support them at election time. So they wire it for themselves.
Right.
Then when Democrats come in, instead of trying to clean the mess up, and I don't want Democrats to wire things for themselves. I want Democrats to create a fair and equitable and just system of governance, and that's
Right.
going to offend a lot of corporations and even some Democratic donors at times. But instead of trying to clean the mess up, Democrats come in and too often manage.
That's right.
They manage what's handed to them. They are a managerial political party. And when you've had corruption and then it's handed off to you and you manage that corruption, you essentially lock it in.
Yes. Yes. And in one of your other recent articles dealing with the census, and the upcoming gerrymandering and redistricting, this presents the Republican Party, the GOP, with a new opportunity to secure their power. Talk about that other article of yours at the Nation.
Sure. And I'm so glad you're focusing on it, because I really think that as much as exposing the corruption and the kind of backdoor dealing of the past, we have to be very conscious of the moment we live in. We're right now at a critical juncture. The much delayed, and frankly, I would argue much warped, census process has now produced data that will be used to draw the district lines for congressional districts, state legislative districts, and right down to the city council and the county commission level. This is really the definitional data that we've got. Now, at the top line, it tells us some really exciting things. America is becoming a more diverse country. America is becoming a country where, frankly, if you drew fair maps, you'd have a lot of possibility for a Congress that looked a lot more like America, right? I mean, the possibilities are more real than ever. And yet, what we have is a clear plan by the Republicans. They're not secret about it at all.
Right.
A clear plan to use this data not to create maps, not to create lines for congressional districts and legislative districts that reflect this growing diversity, that really give us a representative Congress, but to gerrymander the process in radical ways that will actually increase Republican majorities in states that are diversifying. Now, I'm not one of those people who tells you that diversity necessarily leads to a Democratic majority. That's not always the case. I mean, I understand that we have to recognize all these dynamics. But what I can tell you is that the Republican plan is to use this data for one purpose and one purpose only. And that is to warp the process sufficiently that even if most people vote for Democratic candidates in a particular state, that state will have overwhelming Republican representation.
And this is what we see all across the country, right? When you couple the redistricting with the reality of the Electoral College, this is how Republicans who represent a minority opinion in this country, this is how, like that 30% or that 33 some percent that no matter what Donald Trump did, they always supported him. This is how we have the tyranny of the minority. Could you tell the audience not only about the tyranny of the majority, but how do we overcome that when we have a Democratic Party that doesn't seem to recognize the score?
Well, it's clear. I'll start with the Democratic Party. It's clear they do not recognize the score. They left for recess, for their summer recess, and would that we could all have been, take a month off, right?
Right.
Wonderful. So they're out. They've left Washington, and they didn't in the Senate do the single thing they need to do, which is overturn the filibuster or at least find a workaround on democracy issues and pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. These two pieces of legislation address gerrymandering. They literally get to the heart of the matter. Now, literally days before the data came down, at a point when the Congress could have done exactly what they need to do to make sure that we get fair lines, they didn't do it. And so now we're in this danger zone. So that I begin with that side of it, why that's concerning. Now, why is it a danger zone? Because very, very wealthy people, and remember we started our conversation with our Republican friends who make the rich much richer.
Yeah.
Very wealthy people have poured a fortune into weaponizing the redistricting process. And what they have done is develop computer programs, develop strategies, hired people, brought folks into the mix, brought lawyers in. They're ready to go. And in states across the country, they're going to do it. They're going to draw lines that create a circumstance, much like what's happened in my home state of Wisconsin. In 2011, the Republicans had control of the governorship and the state legislature. They radically gerrymandered the state in a way much worse than many states around the country. But they set the model in Wisconsin. Now, what happened? In several election cycles in Wisconsin, we've had as many as 200,000 more people vote for Democrats to control the legislature than Republicans. And yet the Republicans have retained a two-thirds majority, almost two-thirds majority in the legislature. You understand, this is just breaking the very concept of democracy. And that's
breaking the very concept of democracy. I believe that should be the motto of the Republican Party, but I also believe that should be the understanding of the complicity of the Democrats by not understanding the score. I know this may be beating a dead horse, but I think for the audience's sake, could you just express in very direct terms what the Democratic Party could actually be doing with the power that they currently have to stop the Republican Party from breaking democracy?
Sure. It's a very simple process, and it's not too late. I mean, I don't want to be too hopeless on this. It does take time to gerrymander. And so the new data that's come down is, it's already being jammed into those computers. It's already, the strategists are already at work. They are in both Republican and Democratic controlled states trying to draw lines, and the process is in play. It's just that for a variety of reasons, the process favors the Republicans because they control more state houses at this point. And they also control them in a lot of the places, southern states like Texas, Florida, where you've had a little bit of increase in population. So they're going to draw more seats, while many northern seats are going to lose seats, New York, Illinois, places like that. So with that understood, they are rushing to do this. And the truth of the matter is, without federal intervention, without some sort of federal standard that says gerrymandering cannot be the way in which we use this data, they're going to get away with it. They're going to do it. Now, they'll be challenged in the courts, and sometimes a judge will say no. It will often be when a map is genuinely and clearly discriminatory, right? When there's clear evidence of something that's fundamentally wrong. But the courts will not intervene to say, no, this is just simply partisan. You've drawn a map that is anti-democratic, that does not create competitive districts, that doesn't allow for a result that clearly represents the will of the people. The courts don't tend to do that. That's something Congress has to set down as a standard. Now, because they didn't do it before the recess, when the Senate gets back, if they do not move immediately to scrap the filibuster and to pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, if they don't do those two immediately, then yeah, we'll watch it day by day. You and I, we can come back on in September and October and November, and we can count the states off. Texas, Florida, Georgia, where you're not increasing the number of seats, but even with the same number of seats, you can reshuffle it. State after state after state. And I will tell you this, serious analysts say that through just the process of gerrymandering, the Republicans could well get the number of seats they need to effectively assure that in 2022 they get control of the House of Representatives. That's what's at stake if Democrats don't move in September. And you were even getting our chorus behind us cheering us on.
Correct? Yeah, I think that's our cue, Brother John Nichols. My kids have just raided my home office. And it's a critical point of the conversation, because you're saying, before we get out of here, you're saying that if Democrats don't do what they need to do when they come back from recess, a recess that they shouldn't have taken, but I digress, we're going to be able to watch state by state as they fall to the gerrymandering forces of the Republican Party.
There is simply no question of it. You do such a great job of covering all these issues. And I know you'll do it well in the fall. But frankly, I don't want you to have to do it. I don't want myself to have to be writing, one, horrified, aghast, deeply troubled headline after another about how a gerrymander in Texas has, effectively undermined democracy in that state. A gerrymander in Georgia has effectively undermined democracy in that state. In Florida, in state after state after state. And I don't want to write that piece, back in 2022 that says, even though more people voted for Democrats for Congress than Republicans, Republicans got control of the House of Representatives.
Wow. The writing is on the wall. And I hope that the powers that be will listen, so that we don't have to find a way to salvage democracy from the Democrats having the power to protect it, but not protecting it. John Nichols of The Nation, two of your most recent articles were covering the census, and as well as the article on Ron Johnson. I had no idea he was such a prolific grifter. Thank you for covering these stories for us.
It's an honor to be with you, my friend. Thanks for covering them on your show.
Thank you so much.